You were snowed in at the post office.
At the post
for 4
office
days.
substation.
Yeah.
And there was a White Castle next door. Thank God they were open, and thank God I had some money, because otherwise I don't know what I would have done for food for 4 days.
Dr. Joe Thornton, colon rectal surgeon at the Kerkorian School of Medicine. I'm very excited to talk to you. We're obviously going to talk about your professional work, but you've got a fascinating personal background too that I want to talk to you about. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Joe, can we start by talking about Chicago?
Sure.
Talking about your upbringing. Where'd you grow up? How'd you grow up? Let's talk about that.
Well, I grew up in a single parent household with like 3 women, and nobody went past high school. My mother was a barmaid, so I spent a lot of time being babysat at the bar, and then when she wasn't working, she would go to the racetrack. So I knew all the racetracks in Chicago. I would go there and people would fuss over me. That's where I got the most attention, was at the bars and the racetracks. And then when it was time to go to school, the public schools were not considered to be so great, so she wanted me to go to Catholic school. And to go to Catholic schools, there had to be, one parent had to be Catholic, so she became a Catholic, so I could go to Catholic.
Just so you would go to Catholic
Yeah.
school.
And it was interesting. The nuns were very strict on us, back in the 50s. Because I went to a Catholic school out on 61st and Indiana. Yeah, that's where St. Anselm's was. And it was a good experience. The nuns, like I said, they told you a lot. They tried to keep you straight. And then they actually told you, based on how they assessed your ability, they actually told you where to go to high school. If De La Salle High School was a big-time high school on the south side.
It's still a famous high school.
Oh, yeah. The Mayor Daley's both went there, and it actually, even the mayor before the first Mayor Daley, he went there. So it had a lot of tradition. It was close to the back of the yards, which was a big Irish neighborhood. And they actually started to integrate only in the 50s, De La Salle. Even though it was on the south side, they still didn't. I'm not sure whether black students were directed away from it or they just didn't admit students. So the nuns told us, it was me and about 6 or 7 guys in my class, that we should go to De La Salle. But I didn't want to go, but they called your house and you wound up going to De La Salle,
Oh, wow.
And I was lucky that I got in the honors level. They had tracks, and I was in the honors track for the whole 4 years I was there. But I never made the honor society because I found out later, even though I had the grades, they considered me somewhat of a troublemaker because there was a lot of prejudice there. And I was one that spoke up a lot, and so they didn't like me for that reason, and so they didn't accept me into the honor society. And that was a bitter pill for me to swallow for a long time. And it's kind of interesting. I was going to join the Army after I graduated, and had no intention of going to college. I'm not even sure if I ever knew anybody that had gone to college. And so what happened, I was walking down the hallway one day, and it was a Christian Brothers school. They were pretty tough too. And the counselor stopped me and he said, you know, you haven't been to my office to talk about your career plans after high school, and you can't graduate until you do that. And I said, well, I didn't see any reason, because I'm just going to go and join the Army and see what happens and stuff. He says, why don't you come to the office with me? So we walked to the office, and he was saying, if you didn't join the Army, what do you think you'd like to do? And I said, well, I actually thought about becoming a doctor.
Joe, can I take you back for a minute?
Sure.
Because I'm fascinated by the story and the influences that you had. Because I know that there are people who influence you in your life along the way. Mm-hmm. So you grew up with your mom and 2 aunts, correct? Mm-hmm. And you said you spent time at the bars, at the track, and so forth. And you were a very good, very talented student. So can you talk to me a little bit about that, how that environment nurtured you to be a strong academic presence?
I didn't get a lot of encouragement when I set out what I wanted to do. I did get told I needed to go to high school, for sure, but it was the nuns that I give credit for. They were the ones that pushed me academically. And, you know, sometimes you're in the middle of the forest, but you can't see the trees. And so they were the ones that told me the reason I needed to go to De La Salle, because they thought I would be an honor student there.
Did something like that drive you to work harder, make you...
All of that.
Yeah?
Yeah, you know, the things that, the way they were at De La Salle, I just resented. I just saw how they treated some students better that I didn't think deserved to be treated better. And so I don't know where I started talking about it and complaining about it. And so it got me recognized. And I was just kind of labeled, I was smart, but I was a troublemaker, you know, and stuff.
So that's what you mean by a troublemaker, that you would speak your mind about these issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that goes back to the nuns, I think. I have to give them a lot of credit. I do, for my progress academically from the grammar school and getting into high school. And they kept telling us, you'll be competitive. You'll do as well as any other students there. And that was the background you needed to succeed. And so when I finished De La Salle, I enrolled at the University of Illinois at Navy Pier. And I started work at Chicago Medical School, which is right over there at that time down the street from Cook County. And I worked in pharmacology, and they were very supportive of me and encouraged me and stuff. And I worked there for about a year and a half or so. Then I think I took a job at Marshall Field as an elevator operator because I made more money.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask, I knew that you had worked as an elevator operator, but I just thought it was a general job. So you left the medical and then went to, and you were in college at the time, so this was paying for your college.
Well, the $90, yeah. Marshall Fields had a deal where they would pay you in cash on Fridays, then they have sales in the employee store. But it was okay. And then I went to work at the post office. And there's the world's largest post office was in Chicago. The Eisenhower Expressway went underneath it. And it was wasn't a great place to work. So I transferred to a substation on 110th Street in Chicago, and in Roseland was the neighborhood. And what was interesting about that, in April 1967, one of the worst snowstorms in Chicago took place. And I worked at night. I was there by myself, and I was snowed in for 4 days. Nobody in Chicago could go anywhere for 4 days. People were in schools and stuff. And
you were snowed in at the post office.
At the post office substation.
Yeah.
And there was a White Castle next door. Thank God they were open, and thank God I had some money, because otherwise I don't know what I would have done for food for 4 days. And then 2 weeks before finals of my junior year, I was working at the post office, and this guy comes up to me and he says, "You're yellow. You need to go look in the mirror." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You look yellow." And I went and looked in the mirror, and I had jaundice. So the family doctor, Ted Cruzat, his dad had been our doctor, and he had come in and gone into practice with his dad, but he was a surgeon also. So I called him, and he had me go to the hospital, and they thought I had hepatitis, but it turned out I didn't, and I had gallstones. And so he operated on me, and he said, "What is it?" Because he found out it was the same fraternity he belonged in the year before. And he says, "Why do I keep saving you from all these problems?" He says, "What do you want to do?" I says, "Well, I'd like to go to medical school, but I can't afford it, so I think I'm going to join the Army." That was my backup plan still. So he says, "Are your grades good?" I said, "Yeah, they're good." And he said, "Well, my kids are never going to go to medical school. I know that." He said, "I'll tell you this. If you get accepted into medical school, I'll make sure you never have to leave because of money." So he says, "Well, where do you want to go to medical school?" I said, "Well, where did you go?" He said, "I went to Meharry." I said, "Well, that's where I want to go."
It's a wonderful story, and it's amazing that you had somebody in your life that not only saw potential, but was willing to do something to help you with it. And I'm sorry for stopping the story. It's just so, you have the people along the way that see talent, that helped you with it, and then you did the work along the way. Like, you're working all along the way. And I love the story that you're making your way with people helping along the way as well.
Well, I didn't even see it like that. I just kept going day by day.
Yeah.
That was the way life is. You take every day. So actually, I went on and I applied to Meharry, and I get this letter from them that my application was complete, except they were missing my letter of recommendation from Dr. Cruzat. So I called him in his office, and he said, "I can't believe I didn't do that." So that was on Thursday. I think on Monday I got my letter from Meharry saying I had been accepted.
Can you talk a little bit about Meharry? Obviously, is a famous school to people who know medicine, but for people who don't, can you tell a little bit about it?
Meharry and Howard was the first predominantly black medical school right after the Civil War, when the Freedmen's Bureau started. Meharry started in 1875. And up until 1970, Meharry and Howard educated almost 90% of the black doctors and dentists in the United States. And that's one of the reasons why there was such a shortage, because they could only educate so many. Give you an example. I did go over to the University of Illinois to have an interview about maybe going there. So I talked to one of the assistant deans, and so I said, "Well, it's well known you have a quota." He said, "No, we don't have a quota." I said, "Well, everybody thinks you have a quota of 2. He said, "That's not true." I said, "Well, how many black students are in your freshman year?" He said, 2. I said, "How many in your sophomore year?" He said, 2. I said, "How many in your third year?" 2. I'm not even going to ask you how many in the fourth year. And so that was not something I really wanted to deal with. Meharry seemed to be the right place to go, and I had talked to Cruzat, and he was so happy that I chose to go there. And when I went to Dr. Kazort and tell him I was short of money, he says, "Well, it just so happened we got some money just came in, and I'll give you, I forgot how much, a scholarship and a loan so you can pay your room, board, and tuition." And so I made it through my first year. Then I got a job working with high school students after my first year. And somebody told me about a program that was looking for underprivileged students, minority and underprivileged students, they had a scholarship program. And it was Dr. Clyde Phillips who was running it. His office was on 63rd and Cottage Grove in Chicago. So I went over to talk to him about scholarships for some of the high school students we were working with. And he says, actually, we're looking for somebody more advanced. He says, we're over at Cook County Hospital, and we're looking to bring in students from like Meharry and Howard, because they had very few minority residents there. And he says, we're looking to give some scholarships to bring some people to those hospitals, to that hospital. So I said, oh, I know quite a few people that would really be glad to have scholarships. I said, starting with me. So he said, well, how much do you need? And I said, well, I really need $5,000, but I would be happy to get $2,500. And he says, well, I'm the chairman of the committee, and we're meeting next week. So then I get a phone call about a week later from him one evening. He says, well, he used to call people Haas. He says, well, Haas, the committee met tonight, and I told him that you said you needed $5,000, but you would be glad if we would give you $2,500. So we gave you $10,000. I couldn't believe it. And so he's the guy. He was the godfather of my older daughter, Candace, who's the dermatologist. And he was actually the medical director at Cook County. And so then at the end of the second year, it was the Vietnam War was going on in '69, pretty heavy. And there, if you had a deferment and you finished your internship, especially in surgery, if you weren't enrolled in the military, they drafted you, right? You went straight to the officer's training, went straight to Vietnam, and the second lieutenant lifespan was like 30 days.
Oh, wow.
They would kill the doctors so that the soldiers couldn't be taken care of. So what happened, this guy, Bob Baker, who was the chief of surgery, he was letting those guys go early so they could have some more time with their families. So they were hiring medical students to come in and fill in the slots. So Clyde Phillips got me a spot after my second year of medical school. I haven't seen any patients yet.
We got you an appointment at
Cook County as an extern, they called it.
Okay, so again, let's talk about this, because Cook County is not just your normal hospital.
I was born at Cook County.
There are several folks here at UNLV who have been through Cook County for their training.
I know.
And can you just talk to us a little bit about what that is like?
Well, I think the closest that you might have seen to Cook County was the show ER, because it was based on Cook County. And that's kind of like what it was like in the emergency room down there. Not quite, but close enough. We had 5,000 beds, and there were no private rooms. There were just wards with 60 beds in the ward, the women on one side, the men on the other side. And when I started, there were not even curtains between the beds. So if you really did have to do a really in-depth exam, you could take the patient up to an exam room. They had beds lined up in the halls when they were just overflowing, because back in those days, if you didn't have insurance, you had to go, you were sent to the county hospital. No private hospital will take you. So that's why places like Bellevue and Charity in New Orleans and Cook County, they were so big to accommodate all the patients. Now, there's legislation that changed that, so that if you walk in the door, they have to take care of you, no matter what your insurance status. But back then, it was like all night long. There were patients getting transferred. I mentioned the University of Chicago. One night I was on duty as a chief resident on trauma, and an ambulance shows up with a guy who had sustained a gunshot wound to the femoral artery. And they had operated on him at the University of Chicago, but transferred him from the recovery room to Cook County. And I thought, if you operated on him, you should take care of him.
Yeah.
So I called our chief of surgery, and he called the chief of surgery over there, who told him, send him back. And then I started thinking about it. I said, but they don't know how to take care of this guy. They just did the surgery, but it's a lot more complicated. The guy probably loses his leg if I sent him back. So I wouldn't send him back. I kept him there, and I don't remember. I know he did okay, but I don't know if he had complications. But Cook County was like all night long. It was just so many patients coming in there. My first day I reported for duty as an intern in 1971. I didn't return to my apartment for 2 months.
What? How was this?
Well, they didn't have limitations on your hours back then. So what happened, I just happened to be on general surgery. And I had probably the most cruel chief resident you can imagine. He would call us. The cafeteria was open from 5 to 7. He would be sitting across the street in a restaurant, and he would call over to the ward and tell us he was coming over to make rounds, evening rounds. So we would be sitting there waiting for him, and he would call at 5:30 and said, I'm still coming. 6 o'clock, I'm still coming. And then he would show up at 6:30, so we couldn't go to eat. And then they put out cold cuts at midnight. And you had an on-call room, which was very small. You had bigger cubicles here. It was a bed and a desk and an adjoining bathroom. They have 15 floors of rooms like that for the house staff. So what happened, his name, I don't want to tell you his name, but anyway, he wouldn't call me doctor. And all the other doctors were foreign medical graduates. Americans didn't want to go to Cook County because they were always talking about closing it, and the workload was so heavy. So he would just call me Joe. He would call Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so, and he would never address me as Joe. And he used to call me his little colored intern. And I really had such a low self-esteem. But I wasn't going to let him defeat me. He told me I'd never be a resident there. He was going to make sure. And there was prejudice because we came from Meharry, and they thought, well, you can't be as good as us. We actually were better because we had gone to class more. We actually went to school on Saturdays, and no place else did. So what happened, for 2 months, the nights we were supposed to be off, he would keep us there till 11 o'clock at night. And it would take me 40 minutes round trip to get to my apartment. So I just went to my room and went to bed because the nights we were on call, we never slept. You sat on the floor, dozed off until they woke you up for the next case. And you'd go to surgery and you'd be there all night. And so what happened is that when I rotated off my 2 months of general surgery, I went to colon and rectal surgery. Thank God.
Well, that moves us forward. You were the first colon rectal surgeon in Nevada, the whole state.
Yes.
This was in 1978, is that right?
78, yeah.
And which is hard to believe that at that time there was no other colon rectal surgeon.
Well, there weren't that many. And the vast majority were east of the Mississippi. It was like a big, vast empty space until you got to California. And Texas, Dallas was about the farthest west. There were a couple maybe in Denver, but Dallas was pretty much as far west as you would find many. And there were only like 50 of us being trained a year at that time.
In the country? Mm-hmm. What made you go into colon rectal surgery in the first place?
Well, I rotated down to the colorectal service, and a classmate of mine from Meharry had been there in his first rotation. And he told, and very difficult to get things done at Cook County. You had to know the system. So he told the clerk that his buddy of his was going to be coming in 2 months, and he's to look out for me. So I rotate down there, and the clerk says, "Are you Dr. Watkins' friend?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "He told us to look out for you." And I said, "God knows I need it." So there were like 60 residents in general surgery because they had a pyramid system then. You know what that is. So what happened if you started out with, I'm trying to remember, like 20 in the first year. In the second year, there might be 16. And then in the third year, there might be 12. And then by the fourth year, it might only be 8 of you. So there wasn't this guaranteed job. You had to earn your spot. And so there were 60 residents and 1 female. Back then, women didn't go into surgery. And the 1 female was Ernestine Hambrick. So Ernestine, we were sitting, talking. She was a couple of years ahead of me. So she says, "What day you want off this weekend?" I said, "Well, I don't know." She says, "Well, you want to not come in Saturday or Sunday?" I said, "Well, I don't know." She says, "Well, what don't you know?" I said, "I just don't know." I said, "I haven't left a hospital in 2 months, and I just had given up. I've been calling my apartment, the building. It just was lucky. Tell you, if anybody won a lottery in life, that's me, because the apartment building was owned by this OB-GYN, and his wife ran it, and he trained at Cook County, and he went to Meharry. So she kept telling me, "Don't worry, your apartment will be here whenever you get home. I know what it's like over there." And she actually decorated my apartment for me and everything. So what happened is Ernestine says, "Well, what were you working before?" And I said, "I was on board 63 with so-and-so." She said, "Well, you're working with human beings now." And so she said, "You take Saturday and I'll take Sunday." I didn't know what to do with myself. I mean, I was born and raised in Chicago. I just went to my apartment and sat there. I wasn't married or anything. And so what happened is the clerk, like, you could send a patient down for a chest x-ray one day and they could come back the next day. They would actually find people dead that were pushed off to the side down there sometimes. And so we were making rounds, and she asked me to get a chest x-ray, and I told the clerk, I said, "I really need this chest x-ray." He's like, "I got you covered." About 30 minutes later, I walked up to Ernestine, I had the report. And she said, "You got that done that fast?" I said, "Yeah." So she went to Dr. Kerkorian, who was the chief of colorectal surgery, and says, "This guy's really good," because the guy before me, he had made his mother and father call him doctor when he graduated from that. He was actually not a bad guy, and he eventually went into colorectal surgery. But he just rubbed them wrong, so if he needed something done, they just would kind of put it on the back burner, and whenever they felt like it, and so he seemed like he was just total lost there, but he wasn't really. So anyway, Ernestine told Kerkorian, and I got to work a lot, and then Kerkorian made up the schedule for the rotations of the residents. So actually, I got to be, and you went from intern to first year resident back then. And so I got to be a resident, and then I was back on colorectal. And then my second year, I was back on colorectal. So there's one guy asked me, he says, "How come you get to go on colorectal every year? You're not supposed to do that." I said, "I don't know, maybe they don't like me." He said, "But everybody wants to do it, but you get there." So then I think towards the end of my second year, I get a phone call. I'm on cardiothoracic, and I'm really enjoying it because that was the first thing I had seen when I was in high school. And so Kerkorian calls me and tells me, well, Joe, one fellow is away on vacation, another fellow is sick, and the general surgery resident is sick, and you have the most experience of anybody, so I'm bringing you over to the colorectal service, and you're going to be the chief. And Ernestine, by this time, was an attending, and he says, we'll be there with you, and you'll do all the surgeries. So I really fell into it, and Ernestine became the first female colorectal surgeon, not only in the United States, but in the world.
Wow.
And they have a lecture in her honor. She's still alive every year, and she was just recently recognized by the American College of Surgeons as being the first female colorectal surgeon in the United States. So I rotated over there, and every year I was on colorectal. So I applied for the fellowship. So I didn't hear anything. So actually, with Ted Cruzat, who had been my initial motivation for medical school, I was looking at office space with him in Chicago, and I was operating with the chief of surgery, Dr. Saletta, and he said, are you excited about being a fellow in colorectal next year? I said, well, nobody told me. He says, well, you need to go down to the office. So I went down there, and the secretary, her name was Bernadette, and we gotten to be friendly over the years. So I says, Bernadette, Dr. Saletta just told me I was accepted as a fellow, but nobody ever told me. So she said, that ain't my job. She said, let me get Dr. Kerkorian on the phone. So she called him, and he said, well, I figured Bernadette told you. So I said, well, I'm out there. We're about to sign for office space because I didn't know. He says, well, we accepted you as a fellow. And there were only two, me and this other guy, Prasad, who was wonderful. And so we got to stay I got to stay as a fellow. And I really enjoyed it. They were I think a lot of the times when you're in medical school, or maybe, well, in medical school, it depends on the people that are nice to you. That's the way you start to look. I think that has some influence on how you go. And we have had our share of people interested in colorectal surgery. You know, of course, Lance Horner, who is our partner now. I've known him since he was a third-year medical student.
So when you moved to Vegas, why did you move to Vegas?
Well, because my wife is from Alabama, and she hated Chicago. She said the people were mean, and she's a dentist. She was working at Rush in their dental. She worked at Cook County in the dental clinic and at Rush, and she didn't like the weather.
Yeah.
And
Where
so,
in Alabama, by the way?
Huntsville.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So what happened, when I was a resident, there was a guy, Mike Jacoby, who was a general surgery resident. He came in, I forgot where he came in, transferred in, because for a couple of years, I was the only American in surgery at Cook County. Everybody else was a foreign medical graduate.
Wow.
But Mike Jacoby came in, and we used to be on call often, and we shared a call room. By then, they had bunk beds. And so he would tell me about his cousin who was married to a gynecologist out here. And they wanted to they wanted him to move here, but he didn't want the warm weather. He wanted the cold weather. So he used to tell me about him. And then one night, I'm looking around for places other than Chicago. I get a call from Mike, and he says, my cousin's husband wants to talk to you out in Las Vegas. He says that you need to call him before you go anywhere or do anything. So he gave me the number, and I called Jordan Goodman. And Jordan was a OB-GYN here. And he said, you know, there's never been a colorectal surgeon in the state. He said, you would be so busy, you can't believe it. And he was telling me a lot of things, and I said, well, you know, Jordan, that sounds really great, but I'm looking for a place to raise my kids. And he said, Las Vegas is the best place in the United States to raise your kids. And back then, there was like 450,000 in Las Vegas. And we moved here. Actually, the next person I called was Beverly Nealon.
Can I just real quick, because you mentioned Bev Nealon. So Bev's a pediatrician, went to Meharry with you, moved out to Vegas straight from Meharry, I think.
No, she did her residency at UCLA.
Oh, okay.
One
And
of
then
their
Vegas.
hospital,
Yeah.
Harbor, I believe. Yeah, and then she moved here in '74.
I'll tell you, Joe, one of the things, there are two things at least that strike me as we're talking. Number one, there are so many connections that you've had along the way that you've made the best out of. And two, I am just so impressed that you remember so many names. Like, it's incredible to me how you, and it just shows the value of, for you, that you value these people and these connections.
Because
along
I'm
the way.
one of them.
Yeah.
You know, I tell the residents, when you're working, you should learn the names of everybody in the room, the techs and
Yeah.
whoever, you know, because you'll see them a lot. You know, for them, they're mostly at UMC. Sunrise, not so much, but at UMC, they should know the names of the people they're working with.
It's just so valuable. I appreciate it so much that you're talking about these people with reverence as well. Like, this is fantastic. Let me just switch gears a little bit here, because your area of colon rectal surgery is interesting. It's evolved, but one of the areas in particular, I want to talk about your medicine, your medical area, and that's really with fecal incontinence. Can you tell me, am I correct about this? There are 18 million cases of fecal incontinence.
The University of Michigan put a paper out about 8 or 9 years ago, and their estimate was that there's 18% of the population of the United States has some form of incontinence, either fecal or urine or both. And women, a lot of women have both. And the treatment for it evolved. You know, we used to do colostomies on the patients. And about 10 years ago, this company, Medtronic, who does a lot, they do pacemakers and a spinal stimulator, they came to me that they had this new technique for fecal incontinence. And I was leery of it. But I went up to Minneapolis to learn. They brought a bunch of older colorectal surgeons. And I said, why bring us? What about the young guys? They says, because they don't have the volume that you guys do. And we're interested in getting the volume. So I had this lady that had come in she was very stylish. I think she was Danish or something. She lived in Turnberry. She had not actually gone out of the house in over 5 years, except after midnight she would go do some grocery shopping because she was afraid to have an accident. And she did everything else pretty much online. And she came in, and I don't remember who referred her, but we told her about it, and I went up to Minneapolis to learn how to do it. So I came back. She was my first patient. And so I put in the InterStim, is what it's known as by Medtronics. And she told us she couldn't believe how much better she was. She wasn't having the accidents, and I was still not too sure. So what happened is we did it in 2 stages. That's what we do. So my wife and I, we were out at a Michael McDonald concert, and we're kind of in the back, and in front of us, all the people are up dancing and everything. And then all of a sudden, kind of like the crowd spreads, and there's this lady dancing in this white pantsuit. So I go up with my wife, and I tap her on the shoulder, and she grabs me and starts hugging me, and I said, this is my wife right here, you know. And she's telling my wife, this man gave me my life back. And she had a boyfriend, she had a job, she was traveling, she was having no more accidents.
That's a beautiful story. And the technique itself is a neural stimulation, right?
Yeah, it's an outpatient procedure done in 2 stages. The first stage takes maybe 45 minutes to an hour because we put in an electrode by the sacral nerve on S3 on each side, on one side. but we also check both sides to see which gives us better results. So that's sometimes we have such a good result on one side, is we won't do the other side because it's just we don't think we can improve on it. And it's you wear an external battery for a week, and then the success rate has been over 90% for us. And these are women that have not had control of their bowel movements for 10, 15, 20 years.
So you've got this almost miracle cure, right? Intrastem, which is, I love the way that you describe it because it's a relatively simple procedure, but it gives people their life back.
Oh my God.
And then on top of that, you've got other things like diet, nutrition, probably exercise, these types of things. What are some of the other things that you think at a more medium stage can help?
Well, the biggest thing is the interstem can't work if your stools are not solid. So sometimes we had to give them a little extra help besides the fiber. We maybe put them on an Imodium at bedtime to slow things down. But there's no muscle like we talk about the squeezing the muscle and stuff. There's no muscle there, so there's no squeeze. And so that's why it was just something we were totally at a loss as to what to do. And because there was no muscle to reconstruct. You could bring up a muscle out of the leg, and if there was some muscle, the Cleveland Clinic has described that as an obsolete operation because of the interstem. Because the success rate when you did a sphincteroplasty where you reconstructed the muscle down there, if you used the muscle that was there, it lasted about 2 years and it was only successful at about 50% of the time, whereas the success with interstem is over 90%. And so that's the operation of choice now.
As you mentioned, there's some damage that happens sometimes during childbirth. What are some of the other lifestyle reasons for different types of incontinence, increase in cancer, these types of things?
Well, if you've had like radiation for rectal cancer, that can damage the muscles down there also. The rectal prolapses, and that comes from straining a lot, using laxatives too much, and that's a fairly common occurrence also. And we repair the prolapse, but there's no muscle. But if we put an interstem in, we find out that they get control, because that's one of the things when the rectum is prolapsed, you have no sensation. It just comes out, and you find yourself either feeling wet, something running down your legs, or the smell. That's what gets most people.
Yeah, to be able to reverse that, I can understand how that really, people feel like they have their life back in that situation. Have you seen changes over the last couple of decades as far as the number of incidents of incontinence?
Again, I would say, prior to 10 years ago, there wasn't anything but the colostomy if it was really bad. We would do a diverting colostomy, an end colostomy, and I don't remember how many people I might have done that surgery on, just to keep them. You can control your life a lot better if you're incontinent, if you have a colostomy, but that's not the best thing that can be done. But other than that, they tried different things. There were like rings that they tried to put in down there that you put in around your anus. That didn't work. We actually would, to try and help people that were not good candidates for colostomies, we used to put a mesh in around and stop the stool from coming out and prolapse and stuff. That was not successful that much either. So this interstem was just life-changing for the surgeons and the patients, I think.
And one of the things I've read recently is that there seems to be an increase in incontinence and similar issues with younger people as well. Is that happening more?
Well, I don't think we've seen it as, when you say younger people, did they give an age specification?
Yeah, it's a good point. You know, younger than 60s and above. So
Well,
basically happening earlier.
that hasn't been our experience. Most of our patients are, I'd say, in the late 50s to 60s, and that's young compared to some of the ones in the 80s I've done. I've done a lot in their late 70s and early 80s, but I haven't seen anybody that's like, if there's somebody that has an incontinence and younger, unless it's a traumatic injury, then we wouldn't put the InterStim in, because up until a few years ago, the battery lasted 5 years. And they came out with a new version of it about 2.5 years ago, and the battery lasts 15 years. And before, the electrode was not MRI compatible, but now it is. So we've actually had to take them out in the past for people that really needed MRIs. So that's been a big boon to us. And actually, we're seeing people that they show up in the office that had the 5-year battery, because all of a sudden they're starting to have accidents. I recently did a 92-year-old. Her battery died, and she came in and she wanted it changed. And I said, well, we have this new 15-year battery. She said, put it in me. She said, I'm going to get every day out of it I can. She has plans to live 15 more years to get her money's worth out of that battery. And she was so funny. She's doing good. You know, the problem is, once you see them and everything is good, you don't hear from them again, you know.
Well, I mean, I think that's good news, right? No news is good news,
Right.
as far as that's concerned.
Right.
So, Joe, I unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you a few questions about you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, you know, you, in a lot of ways, I see you as a pioneer of the field here in Las Vegas, in general, in the colon rectal space, and so forth. How do you see yourself?
Well, I consider myself having been lucky that I was able to establish the specialty because even to this day, a lot of general surgeons are not trained well with colorectal. One of the things I tell our residents is that they're lucky that we have a colorectal department where they're trained, because there have been there's been several reports out that show that colon surgery done by a colorectal surgeon is much more successful than done by a general surgeon.
So, Joe, you know, mentorship, working with trainees, students, fellows, and residents, and so forth, it's so important to you. So what advice do you have to give people who are in the process of becoming full-fledged physicians?
Well, I tell them that if they identify an area they're interested in, they should try to learn as much as they can about it. And even sometimes, like in surgery, look into subspecialties, which is where a lot of our residents wind up doing fellowships. But our residents don't do fellowships because they're not trained. They do fellowships because they want to do something more specific, which has been the trend in general surgery. But I tell them, don't get discouraged. For every one person that is against them, there are at least 10 people out there that will help them. And if you realize that that's what you really want to do, I think you should pursue that. And if somewhere along the line, if you get there and you decide maybe this isn't what I want to do, don't be afraid to change. You know, we've seen people come through and in our surgery department that got into a couple of years of residency, and one year we had 2 women that left, because we're a very female-oriented residency. And one left, and she had worked in a lab, and she decided to become a pathologist after 2 years in surgery. And another one, I forgot exactly what she did, and she left. So we had to actually go out and find some people that were we had some prelims that we were able to move into those spots, thank goodness. But I think that if you find that that's not what's making you happy, you need to make that decision and not get locked into something for 10, 20 years or so and not be happy. Because I think if you're happy doing what you do, then you'll do a better job at it.
Yeah, that's great. I want to double down on something you said because I think it's so important coming from you, from your experiences that you described. There may be a few people against you, but there's a lot of people for you.
Absolutely. If you're feeling, if your self-esteem has taken a beating, I'm not sure anybody's self-esteem took as much of a beating as I did in my first 2 months at Cook County. It just, I couldn't have stooped any lower. And the good thing was, from one day to the next, I mean, it was like a rocket ship took off because I met people that were nice to me and encouraged me and supported me and wanted to help me. And actually, a lot of times you don't see your potential yourself. You have to look and hope and depend on people that look at you. Because I tell you what, if I looked at myself looking back in grammar school, I never would have thought I would be, even high school, I never thought I would wind up coming from the south side of Chicago to Las Vegas and being at medical school. I went back to my high school once for a career day and spoke with some of the students. At one time, there was only one family out of all the, it was an all-boys school still then, that had an income of over $50,000. They were just one family, so they were very dependent on scholarships, and that's sort of what drove me back to doing stuff for the high school and stuff. But it's the area has changed and become more gentrified, so the income of students, families, is even doctors' students, sons and daughters go to school there now. You know, a lot of the Catholic schools had to become co-ed to stay open, it seemed like, and so I encourage them to try and listen to the people that are telling them things. You know, like I just couldn't believe that anybody that I could become a doctor. You know, because you need to have exposure to that. I think that's one of the good things for medical school, that the students in college have to work around medicine sometime to make sure that that's what they want to do. I think that's an excellent thing, because I didn't have that. Well, I had it in, I take it back, but I was in a pharmacology department. That not exactly like medicine, you know.
Yeah, I mean, looking at those people who are willing to help you and taking advantage of those, you did that over and over and over again in your career.
There were so many times that if I was given an Academy Award speech, it might take an hour. You know how they play the music to get you
To
off.
thank everybody.
Yeah, I would be up there. Oh yeah, thank you, Sister Incontinence and Sister Lucy and Brother Ignatius and all those people.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great statement, and it's very clear listening to your story that that's something that has happened time and time again, and you've taken advantage. So let me just ask you a couple of quick questions here. Your North Star, your guiding principle in life, what is that?
I think to do the best I can, and I get patients that thank me for doing, and I said, but that's my job. I said, if I wasn't helping you, if you weren't happy with me, I'm not doing my job right. And I think back to the people at Cook County that I train with, and I say I'm so close to them, like Ernestine and Dr. Kerkorian and some of the other guys, and I said, we had a bond, and our dedication to our patients. You know, once I take you on as a patient, you're a family member, you know, and I'll do everything I possibly can to make you well, or to the point where the best that can be done. And so I think that's my North Star, is always try to do the best you can.
You know, Joe, this has been really fun, and you've told us so many wonderful moments in your life. What are a few moments of joy that pop into your head now?
Well, I think one of the things is about 14 years ago, some of the nurses from here, there's one group from UMC and another group, asked me to go on a medical mission to the Philippines. And I started going there. And that was one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life, the surgeries we do over there. Because you look at the people, and they look at you, and they're so happy, you know, at what you've done and stuff. The surgeries we've done, there's a retired surgeon from Chicago that goes with me, and because I don't do a lot of colorectal, you're just a surgeon over there, but I have done some colorectal things, and I really enjoyed that. We got canceled the last time in 2020. We had our tickets and the pandemic, and we haven't gone back, but they want to go back in February next year, and I'm still trying to decide if I'm going to make it with them. But that's one of the most joyful things. Just the look on the faces of the people. The people live on like $30 a month where we go. It's a 50-bed hospital that usually has 150 to 200 patients. So they're on stretchers, cots out in the hallway and stuff, and it's very fulfilling going over there. I think family is important because my wife and I have been married 52 years now. She went to Meharry. The funny thing is, I wasn't attached or anything to anybody. My focus when I got to Meharry is I had to succeed because I had no backup plan. I mean, I had nobody to fall back to. A lot of the kids there were doctors' kids. They drove nice cars and stuff, and I rode the bus if I went anywhere, you know. And so I was just dedicated to not the people that had been supportive of me. I didn't want to disappoint them, and I didn't want to disappoint myself. So fortunately, I accepted an offer to take this girl to a dance, and that's now is 54 years later. The dance is still going on. And so my children, my one daughter is a dermatologist here in town, and she's more prominent than I am, you know, and her husband a plastic surgeon. And so I think family gives me a lot of happiness and stuff. Yeah, I tell you what, I'm so happy with the medical school because when I got here, I see how things have come so much, and I'm so happy that I was just able to have a little part of the medical school, and I feel like medicine in the future in Las Vegas will be so much better than it was 40 years ago when I got here. I mean, I could give you need a few hours for me to give you all the examples of stuff, and I think the medical community is much better than people give it credit for. You know, we have just the medical school. We've got people that finished here, and fortunately, a lot of them that were not from here originally have come back to practice. And we have, like, my one recent example is Gabriella that just finished in June. She decided she wanted to do breast surgery. So she applied to, and the match came out. And I says, well, Gabriella, how did you do? She says, well, I got my fourth choice. Well, that's not too bad. I said, what was your first choice? She said, UCLA. And I said, what was your second choice? I think it was Stanford because of Jenny Benosa. And then the third choice was, I think, USC. Because Gabriella's from Carson City. And I said, well, what was your fourth choice? She says, Columbia University in New York. I said, Gabriella, you don't realize you won the lottery. They take one person out of the hundreds that apply there, and they took you. And she just was afraid to live in New York. She just sent me some pictures. She just started a week ago, right before she started. She said, I love this town. She's had a chance to get to see it a little bit. My only fear is they'll try to keep her back there. Somebody will try to keep her. We had a girl that born at Sunrise Hospital, went to Valley High School and UNR, undergrad and medical school. She did her residency here and went to Colorado to do a plastic surgery fellowship. And she went to Mass General to do a hand surgery fellowship. So when she was finishing, I sent her a text and I said, well, Crystal, where are you going to be working in July? And she sent me a composite photograph of the plastic surgery department at Harvard Medical School with her picture in there.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And Benosa, he thought he was going to get her back here. She said, I couldn't turn it down. She said it was a dream of a lifetime. So I've been frustrated that some of these places have poached some of our best people, like Stanford took a few people. They got all these great people that go to Stanford. Why do they have to come down here and take our good people? We have a much smaller pool, So I think medicine, I tell people if you need surgery, there are very few things that you need to go out of state for. There are a lot of well-trained surgeons here. I think mostly is knowing who are the best people.
Joe, I got to tell you, when you were talking about family, connection, contribution, like in the Philippines, it just made my heart fill up watching the joy on your face. And I want to tell you how grateful I am for everything you've done, the trail you've blazed, the contribution you've had, and the time you've spent with us today. So, Dr. Joe Thornton, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.